In this video, I'm going to show you 5 essential pattern grooves that you can use to add energy to your songs. We're going to cover cool things like how to add depth to some of these grooves using things like swing and syncopation. You can use these patterns on any instrument and they will work in any genre as well. So let's get started. The first pattern is a dotted eighth note pattern. The cool part about dotted patterns is that they have more groove depth than standard patterns. Now to make this pattern, you can use any instrument: bass, lead, chords, drums. I'm going to use this set of chords. So to make a dotted eighth note pattern, you get your notes, and the first thing you want to do for each chord, if you're using chords, is make them each 1/8 note long. The way to get an eighth note is if you look at the top here, every DAW has their bars laid out like this, and you take one bar in length and make your notes 1/8 the size of that bar. But there's one more step. To make a dotted eighth length, we take these notes and add 50% of their size onto them, so that they are now 75% the size of a quarter note. We're just going to take these and re-trigger them at 1.5 the size of that original standard eighth note. And then we get a dotted eighth pattern. Now, in my opinion, the most character-defining thing you can do to a dotted eighth pattern is decide where it resolves and then restarts. So if you look at our pattern here, it has these spaces in between each bar. That's because this pattern isn't perfect and it has to resolve. One of my favorite ways to run a dotted eighth note pattern is to resolve it every 2 bars, which means I'm going to slide this over so that this next chord doesn't start perfectly on grid here, but then we get this bigger space in the middle here. I'm just going to fill that in and shorten it with a standard eighth trigger. And I'm going to do the same thing here. So before, our pattern was resolving every bar. Now it's resolving every 2 bars. This is going to create more tension in the pattern. Another thing you could do to deepen the groove is add swing. So what we could do is we can nudge every other trigger a bit off grid. If we zoom in, we can see it's not perfectly on grid where it was, and the resulting sound is an even more intense pattern. And to make the depth of that groove more apparent, you can experiment with adding more syncopative elements. For example, I have a vocal chop here. It sounds like this. If we take this vocal chop and we create a standard rhythm with it, not a dotted rhythm, we'll get syncopation between the 2 types of rhythms. So I'm going to grab this chop and just put it on every upbeat. I'm also going to add a set of drums, and we get a nice, deep, syncopated groove. The next pattern groove is the dotted quarter. Let's say you're in the situation where you have a set of chords. And then you have to go and add a bass. So you add this bass. It's just not that exciting. There are some situations where you can pull something this slow off, but we're trying to add energy. We're going to do that with the dotted quarter. So the way we make a dotted quarter note pattern is we start with a note that is a quarter note long, or in other words, 1/4 the size of 1 bar. And then take the size of the note and add 50% of its size to itself. And then we have to re-trigger it back to back with itself. And here's where, again, we run into the issue with dotted rhythms, and that is we either have to resolve it here, or resolve it here, or resolve it after 4 bars. Let's just make it easy and resolve it after every 1 bar. And so we'll follow the chords, and then we get this sound. Now we have the same issue here that we had with the 8th pattern, and that is that it resolves every bar and then restarts the pattern. My problem with that is that it's a little less tense and the groove doesn't go as deep than if we were to resolve it every 2 or 4 bars. And the way we do this is, instead of restarting the next chord right on the bar, we move this over and add another full dotted quarter note, and then we can resolve here. We could do the same thing here. So now our dotted quarter pattern resolves every 2 bars instead of 4 bars. So you can hear there, we get nice syncopation, but obviously the energy is a little bit slower moving than that 8th pattern, because you're hearing less notes. This next pattern groove is when you cross over dotted 8th note patterns with dotted quarter note patterns. So in other words, you take one instrument and you have elements of both pattern styles in that instrument. So again, let's just say we have a set of slow moving chords. And we can feel that the chords are very slow, their energy is very low. But we need to add energy to these chords with a bass line that moves around a lot, or a bass line that has a deep groove. So what we could do is use a dotted quarter and 8th crossover. So for the first chord, we'll follow this chord with a dotted quarter note. Now the basic way to move forward from this, just take this, pull it down like that. But that's just going to carry that steady, slow-moving energy all the way through. What I could do is I could take these notes and make them 50% the size, or in other words, make them the size of dotted 8th notes. So then we get something like this. You get kind of that call and response energy. And what we want to do here is make sure our rhythm is consistent. So we're just going to take these and copy and paste them onto the second 2 bars. Make sure the notes are right. And the cool part about grooves like this is now there's even more things that you could do to add depth and energy to this type of groove. So because this bass line moves around a lot, it'll sound pretty natural to add some passing notes in here. And also shorten them and see if we could swing any of these notes. We can. Now the next pattern on this list is the standard 8th note pattern. Now this is the most basic, straightforward pattern on this list, and it gives a completely different vibe or energy from the patterns that we just did before this. So standard 8th note pattern is when you take the instrument of interest, in my case I'm going to use these chords here, and you make the chords or the whatever instrument 1/8 the length of a single bar of time, and then you just copy and paste it and trigger it at that rate of speed. And then we get this sound. And what I think is cool about a standard note rhythm like this is that it doesn't have the groove or the funkiness that the dotted rhythms had that we used early in this video. Instead, this one has more of like a pulse or like a heartbeat. It just goes, it just rolls. Now what I like to do with rhythms like this is add ducking to every downbeat. This ducking effect will add to the relationship between the chords and your drum rhythm. It's very basic, but now it has that pulsing energy. Now, like I said earlier, this pattern style is really basic. Anytime you have a basic pattern style, you have the most room to add elements to it. If you have a complex rhythm style, it's harder to add things to it. Which leads me to my last pattern style on this list. And that is where you take all the dotted and standard note rhythms and combine them to do whatever you can to add really groovy syncopation to your song. So I'm going to come down to my bass line here and I'm going to add some syncopation to these chords. We're going to start off with 2 standard quarter notes, and then we'll drop down 2 dotted 8th notes. We'll do 3 of them. Hear where I'm going? So here we have a rhythm that consists of every rhythm that we use in this video so far, which is both standard quarters and eighth notes, as well as dotted quarter notes and dotted eighth notes. And so here's everything back at once. So yeah, that's your freestyled rhythm. That's a video for you guys. I hope you enjoyed it. If you would like more help with building patterns, whether it's chord patterns, bass patterns, melody patterns, and drum patterns, I cover all of that in my EDM Bootcamp course. And for a limited time only, my course comes with lifetime access to my inner circle. This is where you can share your music with me and receive my feedback on it, and also communicate with other students. If this sounds like something of interest to you, there's a link below this video at the top of the description, and I will see you in there. Stay tuned for the next video lesson.